So welcome. We're going to be talking today, Table for One, building a competitive paper-based AI. My name is Arthur Franz. I'm a designer and a print-on-demand publisher through Uplink Underground Games. Just a little bit about me. The main game that I'm probably most known for is Breakaway Football. It's actually, the reason I bring it up is we're going to use it as an example in a bit when we talk about making an AI. There are 11 expansions currently available, and I think we may have reached the limit there, but we'll see. I think we have one more coming out. And then I've also been a writer with Meeple Mountain for about 4 years now. I've been on a bunch of different podcasts. I'm really excited to be here. My day job is as a learning and development manager, so I'm hopeful that this presentation is organized well and that you'll learn a little something and get a little something out of it. So today's topics, what we're going to cover, are exploring what works about solo modes and what you want to watch out for. Also presenting two basic solo modes. And so we're going to talk about these two things, a chaos engine and a reactive machine, and sort of examples of those so that you can decide which one of those you want to use when you're designing your solo mode. We're going to offer guidance on how to create your own paper-based solo mode. So we're not talking about using apps for AI. That's a very different thing. We're really just talking about keeping that board game experience on the table and making sure that people have a high quality experience with just the components in the box. And then lastly, we're going to do a very brief case study, show the evolution of Breakaway Football's AI, where it started, which was suboptimal, and where it ended up, which has gotten really good reviews. And so with that, we just want to clarify what is a solo mode. It's an additional set of rules allowing a single player to play a multiplayer board game by themselves. So I know there's some discussion around this concept of true solo versus sort of multi-hand solitaire. When we talk about solo, if one person is sitting down to play that game at the table, and they're able to do so, that's a solo mode. And so essentially, effective solo modes offer a few things, and I like to kind of combine these. The first one is suspended disbelief. So the idea here is that you need to feel like you're playing against a real person, which I'm going to shorten, kind of truncate, and call the bot. So the bot is the one that's making the decisions, and those decisions need to be both plausible and appropriate. Nothing is going to pull me out of that experience faster than an engine that makes a bad decision or an implausible decision, where it's something that just a normal human player wouldn't do that, and it just sort of reminds me that I'm playing against paper or against the system. The next thing is the cognitive load needs to have an ease of use. So the user interface, the UI, needs to be very easy to interpret. I need to be able to know where I'm supposed to look and when. The input and output is very quick and painless. So I don't want to feel like I'm having to do my taxes in order to kind of get this output out. I really want to put a little bit in, a little bit out, and that the quality is really high. And that operating the bot doesn't distract the player from their strategy, because ultimately you're sitting down, you just want to play the game. And so if you have all of this other work that needs to be done, that's kind of pulling your attention away from the decision making that you want to be doing, then the juice might not be worth the squeeze there. Lastly is sufficient challenge. The bot's choice can't be predictable. It can't be something that I can figure out very easily, because then I sort of unveil the fact that I'm playing against paper and it becomes less fun. It is nice also if the difficulty can be tuned up or down to match the skill level of the player, because maybe when I'm first learning a game, I'm going to play it on an easier mode. But as I gain mastery, I would like to be able to dial that difficulty up within that system so that I can still have a sufficiently challenging experience. So it's a lot, but we're going to talk about how to do this well today. So as far as learning from research and feedback, one of the things that I like to do is explore the works that I admire. Basically, what would I like to have put my name on if I could wave a wand? And so I do like to read blog posts about games that I want to emulate. I think that's a good rule of thumb. And what I don't mean is the sort of top 10 solo games of 2021 or any of those things. Those actually tend to be more like advertisements, and you have to take them for what they're worth, right? So those top 10 lists are really good to sort of see, hey, am I missing any games that are notable or relevant? But for the most part, I want to dig and unearth games that are interesting to a lot of different people. So one of the ways I do that is I'm on Facebook, and there's a group of solo board gamers, probably about 45,000 people and counting right now, but they are constantly talking about games that they're buying, taking pictures of those games and talking about what works and what doesn't, not as designers, but just as end users. And I lurk in that group because it's very helpful to see what people are playing. And sometimes I'll get an idea of what I want to play. In fact, a game called Warp's Edge, which is a solo only game that I just recently purchased, was at a recommendation of that group. And it's a super lot of fun. So that's a good thing to do if you're trying to get into designing solo games. Playing solo only games can be a good gateway. Also, thinking critically about what doesn't work in a solo game. So, as we know, not all games are perfect, and we want to make sure that if we see something that isn't working, that we kind of keep track of that. Again, not to trash a game or to speak negatively of it out in the public, because there's really no benefit there, but to kind of tuck that away in your own list of, ooh, I see where this doesn't work. I want to make sure that when I design my solo game, that I don't do that. So be fair and honest about where a game underperforms and kind of keep a running list of those don'ts, like don't do this. Some of it's preference, right? But some of it is things that really just do not work. And in a little bit in this presentation, I'm going to show you my running list of don'ts. So I've actually collected that for you to take a look at. Lastly, seek out feedback. So especially if you are designing a solo game, don't make the mistake that if you are obviously an intelligent person who's a critical thinker and likes playing games solo, that your opinion is the only one that is necessary. What you want to do is find groups of people who are focused on solo play and put that game in front of them to get it tested frequently. So many times we find that there are blind spots when we are designing games, things that wouldn't have occurred to us because maybe we have fundamental assumptions, or maybe we've gone through the exercise of sort of knowing where to look at the page because we designed it, whereas someone new doesn't intuitively know where to look in the solo engine. So this is all really good feedback that you can collect. And you're not really asking other people, how would you fix it? You really just want to collect what is not working for you and also what is working for you. So that holds true. So let's go over some examples now of signs of a solo mode that's underperforming. So none of what I'm going to say here is meant to be disparaging to any of these games. This is actually the consolidated research from that 45,000 person group on Facebook. These are the things that I hear a lot of. And so if you start to see those patterns, it's worth putting down in your don'ts list. So the first one is a disproportionate amount of randomness. So when a card draw alone plays too great a role in success or failure. So, truth be told, I own Arc Nova. I enjoy that game. It doesn't make it to the table very much because it's got so many cards, especially in the solo mode, that I feel like there are so many cards and there's only a few that are going to sort of feed the strategy that I want to do, that I really have to play just the hand that I'm dealt and kind of make the best of whatever is available. So if I want to do this kind of strong reptile strategy, I may not be able to find the cards that allow me to do that. So that is less than satisfying. The fact that I can't kind of mine the deck and find the things that I want to do. I've not played Grand Austria Hotel, but I've heard the same complaint there, that there's kind of a disproportionate randomness. So you want to feel like you're not just sort of in a swirling maelstrom of chaos. You really want to have some agency and some control over what you're doing. But then if you swing that pendulum too far to the other side, you end up in what's called a closed loop, where there's not enough randomness and the game is kind of solvable after a few plays. I've heard this levied against Lords of Hellas and A Feast for Odin. And I think those games, I haven't played either of those games. So again, I'm not really making that case. I've just seen this chatter about these games quite a bit, where once you kind of figure out how to do it, it becomes very easy to do. And so at that point, maybe break out some other game. So we're really looking for, how do we create a solo mode that provides that sufficient level of challenge through repeated plays. The last thing here is unsatisfying victory conditions. I like to bring this up because the whole concept of beat your own score, I don't like it. There are a lot of people who do like it though. And so I'm not here to say, never design a beat your own score game. That's not the case at all. But I do find that I want to, accomplish an objective, not just like an arcade game, run up a score and see if I can beat my own high score. But like I said, there are some people who enjoy the kind of empirical rating scale of knowing that they scored 900 this time, and that if they do things a little better, maybe they can get to 950 or 1,000. So, that really is up to you and your style. Another sign that your solo mode might be underperforming is if the cognitive load is too great. I've seen this levied against Madara. Again, a game I have not played, but my understanding here is that it's a really good game, especially at 4 players, because in order to play the game, you have to have characters. There's 4 characters, and they all need to participate. So if you have 2 players, then each player is going to take 2 characters. If you have 3 players, then one player will take 2 characters, and then the other 2 players will take 1 character each. But if you're playing solo, you have to plug and chug for all 4 characters. And it's not that that isn't fun, and it's not that it isn't satisfying. It's that it might be just too much processing to it kind of eats into your fun. So again, that's different for every person, but certainly as you're designing your game, you want to be looking at that. Hey, am I asking my players to do too much? Another thing is the solo rules might be too fiddly. So this is usually a case when you've got kind of a desire to get a perfect decision made by the bot. Notice that none of what we've talked about so far is modeling human behavior. We're not trying to recreate human decision making on paper. That's really not. It's not a good target. But I think with genotype and Kanban, what I've heard is that it's a lot of work to get the result. And my assumption is that the result is probably pretty good, but that the level of effort required to get the result might be not worth the time, to do that. So we have to kind of find those ways of shortcutting or truncating the input portion so that we can get a plausible output. So we want to watch out for solo rules that are too fiddly. Last thing here on our don'ts is that the core game mechanisms are ignored or unused. So this is my personal beef with Terraforming Mars. I really like Terraforming Mars. It's tough to get it to the table in a multiplayer setting, but I really enjoy it. But the solo mode, I think, misses the mark because a lot of the fun of the game is in uh, the milestones, the awards, and the cards, right? Those are the things that I find the most exciting about it. But when you're playing solo and you have to try to terraform the entire planet in 14 generations, it does incentivize you to really focus on the standard projects of asteroids and putting down lakes and whatnot. And so you don't really get to use a lot of the fun bits, and some of the things like the awards and the milestones are just ignored completely. So that's one of those things where if you have fun bits of the game and you just sort of set them aside because they don't quite fit into the solo mode, you're kind of shortchanging the solo experience. The last one here is winning solo encourages an oddball strategy. I've heard this about Sagrada. I can't remember exactly how it works. I think Sagrada has the AI grab dice of a certain range. I want to say it's the low dice when it rolls. And so what you end up with is this strange incentivizing behavior that doesn't match the core loop of the game. If I know that the AI is likely to grab certain dice, it's going to be harder for me to score those because the AI is going to grab them first. So then I might actually make a suboptimal decision just so I can kind of undercut what I know the AI wants to do. And now I'm not playing the game Sagrada, I'm playing this weird solo, version of Sagrada. So those are the don'ts. As we move into sort of why would we create a solo mode to begin with, there's a couple of really compelling reasons. One is increasing marketability and accessibility of your game. If you've got a multiplayer design and you can get to a point where you can get a 1 on the box for player count, that's a good thing. However, I do want to caution you, please don't kind of cobble together or rush a solo mode just so you can put that 1 in the player count on the box. Solo players they're kind of fussy, right? And they want what they want, and rightly so. Um, the solo experience needs to be good. And so if it's not good, if it hasn't been designed purposefully and you haven't spent enough time on it, it could actually hurt your sales, because I've seen a lot of games get um, talked about in the solo community as, well, that's kind of a tacked on solo mode, or it's not that good, and that actually can cut into the number of sales that you have, especially from that target audience. So increasing marketability and accessibility of your game, really design it well, and it'll pay off. Also, you may have a homemade variant of your favorite multiplayer game. Like, for example, if you don't like the way that Terraforming Mars handles solo, and you're like, gosh, I could do my own version. I'll do one better. You can go ahead and do that, right? So knock yourself out. That's a good reason to do it. There are 2 types of solo mode we're going to talk about today, and they really function about how the information is managed. So I call them a chaos engine and a reactive machine, which I kind of shorten to a bot. A chaos engine really has no structured thought in your opponent. It's really more of an environment that kind of chucks obstacles at your head, and we have some examples that I'll go through very briefly to show you that. But pandemic is one of the classic examples of that we'll talk about. The reactive machine actually is a true opponent, and that's going to select its choice of what to do based on the game state and also the choice from the player. So those are the two things. And then as far as the central question here that we're talking about, does the solo mode need to choose its move as a response to the human player's action? And so what I mean by that is if the solo mode is waiting for me as the human to make a choice, then that is a reactive machine. If it's not, it's a chaos engine. So if I can, regardless of what move I make as a human, regardless of what happens, it's going to do what it does. And that's a great example of just random card pulls. If you've got like pandemic is a really good example of that. You're going to pull, the number of cards that you pull, regardless of what I do, whether I move to this city and clean this infection or, use this special ability, it's going to do what it does. But when you have a game that actually takes into account what it is that you've done, that's when you need a reactive machine. So let's take a look at some one player game designs and just kind of take a look at the structure of a solo game. So, just very briefly, when you create a stable system with a simple objective, that's pretty much all you've got when you're talking about a solo game. So, you'll do that, you'll create a stable system with a simple objective, and then you'll kind of increase the challenge by doing a series of things. Could be adding constraints, introducing threats, complications, or obstacles, imposing turn limits or time limits, and then the ultimate goal of that solo game is to restore or establish order to the system. So here's an example: Free Cell. I'm sure you all played a lot of Free Cell. I played the heck out of this back in the 90s. So when you talk about creating a stable system with a simple objective, it's really just stacking this 52 card deck in suit, excuse me, by suit in sequence. So that's a pretty easy thing to do. If I just took cards and kind of splayed them out on the table and then I started rearranging them, it wouldn't be much of a game. It's just an activity at that point. So to make it a game, I'm going to add constraints. I'm going to say, okay, well, I've only got four free cells that can hold extra cards. Oh, I'm also going to make sure that I randomize the deal so I can start in this particular order. And as you'll notice, a lot of the cards are actually covered up. So if I can only move one card and I can move one card into one free cell, then all of the cards that are underneath that card I want to move are not available to me at this time. And now there's some emerging strategy that comes in. The free cells only hold that one card. And so the way you establish order back to the system is to, within those constraints, stack that 52 card deck by suit in sequence. And that's what makes it a game is really the constraints that you've placed on it. I do kind of mention that adding and removing those challenges, you want to make sure that you're kind of hitting that 50%, maybe as high as 65% mark as far as a win rate. That's up to you. It really is your choice how often you want people to win. I do counsel you to think about what that experience feels like if the win rate is 90%. So if you're up at 90% and it's really easy to win, you're winning 9 out of 10 times, there's a decent chance that people will see the game as too easy and just kind of set it aside. Conversely, if the win rate is like 1 out of 10, some people like that kind of punishing system. Most people don't. So it really is up to you where you want it. But I shoot for that 50 to 65% because it should be challenging. It shouldn't be a guarantee that you're going to win when you play, but you should have a pretty decent chance to win. So here's an example of a solo game, Deep Space D6. If you've ever played Deep Space D6, it's a super fun game. I'm not going to go through the how to play it in the interest of time. I just want to make sure that we're covering everything. But the objective here is to survive all threats and defeat the big boss. The stable system is actually this board, the ship board that you have, and basically the way that challenge is increased is through the way that the dice are manipulated. You're rolling the dice, you're kind of placing them. Sometimes they get trapped, and then you restore order by using the random dice and the random die faces that pop up, using them wisely to mitigate threats and eliminate threat cards. But the system, the way it introduces the threat, is random card draw off of the top of this threat deck and random die rolls that you have to adjust to. So when we think about what style of opponent that is, because there's so much randomness, and also because the system is not responding to what you are doing, it is a chaos engine because it doesn't care what you do. It's going to continue to spit out threats in any given order. And even though there is randomness in the system, that's not what makes it a chaos engine. The chaos is it does not care what you do. It's going to spit out whatever results it spits out just as a function of the rule set, rather than having to see what you, the human, have done and then respond to it. So that's really the difference. There's another example is Honorim. I've actually never played this in a physical form. I have the app, and I love the app. I've played the app like 1,600 times. It's a great game. But this game is just about ordering cards. You've got a key, sun, and a moon symbols, and then you've got four different colors: blue, tan, green, and red. And basically, the way this works is you're trying to order the cards in a particular way. I've actually captured here a little bit of video of playing the game. And so, as you can see, you're sort of discarding and adjusting as these shadow cards come up. And you can use a key to kind of clear it. But it's a really cool game because you are reacting to what it's giving you, but it is not doing any thinking, right? It's a deck of cards, and what comes out is what comes out, and you have to sort of react and adjust your strategy to it. So as a result, uh, you know, basically by restoring order to the system, you're just trying to organize the cards the way they are and mitigate the threats of those shadow cards. So when we look at how the system makes its decisions, it's just a deck of cards, it's just stuff coming off the top. And so you should see here that it's going to be a chaos engine because it's not reacting to what you're doing. So what I do is important and it matters, but it's not that the game system is reacting to what I'm doing. The game system simply spits out more randomness, and I have to respond to it myself. So let's talk about how a chaos engine works. The randomized conflict to scale difficulty, the environment's often the antagonist. So it's just, more stuff chucking grenades at your head. You see a lot of deck mining where I need specific cards. So I'm going to go mine this deck and go find those cards, and especially mine them before the deck runs out. That's a pretty common thing where you see the deck as a clock. The late game difficulty ends up being just more of the same. So in Pandemic, for example, you've just got more of the infection cards that you're pulling. So after multiple outbreaks, you're just pulling more of these. So more cities are getting infected. The decision quality doesn't actually change, right? So it's not going to improve or reduce, really. It just is what it is. And because you're having so many late game difficulties, that's what makes it more difficult. It's not that the system is smarter or making good intelligent choices. It's just throwing more stuff at you, making it a little more difficult for you to win. So this applies to both one player games that we talked about and also co-op games. I have a couple of examples of co-op games, and again, in the interest of time, I'll kind of skip through this. But we talked a little bit about Pandemic. And so you can see that basically the stable system is you take four actions and draw two cards. So if you don't have any constraints, it's a pretty simple thing to run around the board cleaning up disease. But the increase in challenge actually comes from the regular spread of disease, the fact that there are constraints in how you can share city cards in order to actually solve the problem, you cure the disease. There's constraints on the deck construction to make sure that the epidemics show up at regular intervals to spread the disease. And then you restore order by simply removing the disease cubes from the board and curing the disease. So there's, how many are there? Four diseases? Yeah, there's four, five in some of the expansions. And again, that is a great example of how the decision quality doesn't change. In order to make it harder, if base Pandemic is too easy, then you add the expansion that adds the fifth disease. And that is how you sort of ramp up that difficulty. So Pandemic is a good system because you can scale the difficulty to match your skill, but there's always that element of chaos involved that, you can make all the right decisions, but because the game kind of runs away from you, it's possible to get in a situation that's unwinnable. And of course, that is a chaos engine. So that really is a good example of a chaos engine. Another one, our last example, is this War of Mine. And again, I'm not going to kind of step through how to play this, but if you haven't played this War of Mine, go out, find a video on how to play this thing and watch it. It is an experience unlike anything that I've ever encountered. And there's actually a very good friend of mine who refuses to play this game because it is very bleak. And but it's a fantastic game. The objective is to survive until a ceasefire. You're basically civilians in a war zone, and you're just trying to kind of stay alive. So the stable system is you take day actions, you eat, you drink, you scavenge, and you go to bed. So it doesn't sound like much of a game, but it's actually thrilling because there's so many ways that the challenge gets increased. You've got to go out and scavenge, and when you scavenge, you can run into people by making noise, and you don't really want to make noise. So there's ways that you can try to mitigate that. But for the most part, if you run into people, most of them are not on your side. They don't have your best interest in mind. They may beat you up. They may take your stuff. The chapter objectives add side quests with brutal fail conditions. So there are, we have to provide 5 vegetables to these starving people. And if you accomplish that, then you get a modest bonus. But if you don't accomplish it, you get this crushing uh, a fail condition. And so it really is one of these things where, yeah, you're going to slog through and try to accomplish this thing for a very meager benefit. There are tougher cards that get added into the Residents of the Night Raid decks in Chapter 2. So things ratchet up because the cards available get more difficult, and the easier helpful cards are usually single use, so you'll use it once and it's gone for the rest of the game. Um, and so with that, how do you restore order to the system? You're just always mitigating risk, and there's these different character states of fatigue, wounds, illness, hunger, and gosh, I forget the last one. um, Wounds, illness, fatigue, hunger, misery. How could I forget misery? So the misery, people can get so sad that they actually run away, and you'll lose the character, or they'll kill themselves. Like it's a thing. So anyway, the system makes its decisions through this one black die roll, and also a lot of random card draws. And it's got this really great book that you kind of go in and read these excerpts. But it's absolutely a chaos engine, because the input, it does not care what you are doing. It only cares about the state of the game and sort of what the die roll is, and that takes you to the place that sort of triggers that next event. So these games are really good. I mean, I like them, but when should I design a reactive machine? We've been talking about Chaos Engine, Chaos Engine. When do I get to use a reactive machine? Well, that's when chaos undermines the user experience. So if chaos makes it unfun, that's when you really need to start looking at, okay, well, I need a reactive machine. So the bot needs specific information to make its choice. And really, what that is it needs to know what I did as the human in order to react to that. Random results are unrealistic or implausible. So if we're avoiding nonsense, and I actually have a really good example of this from Breakaway Football, which I'll show you how our initial design missed the mark, and our second design really hit it a lot closer. Uh, when the game state matters, and what I mean by that is when my decision as a human player uh, has a potential to change the strategy of the bot. It sees that zigged when maybe I should have zagged, and now it's saying, "Oh, well, it zigged. So how do I respond to that?" And when my move's intent would trigger a reaction from another human player, really, it's when it sort of showcases a strategic decision. So we're going to talk about how to do this in creating your own artificial intelligence. So let's take a look. So when designing a chaos engine, you really have everything you need right in front of you. It's already kind of baked into the game. The examples that we spent a lot of time on probably showcase that. You're going to identify threats that destabilize your system, randomize that threat deployment, whether that's a die roll, as it was in Deep Space D6, or card draws, as most of those games have. You can also do charts and dice if that works for you. And then you're going to scale the threats to increase the frequency or the power. And this is how you kind of get the AI to respond with more aggression as the game uh, ramps up to its conclusion. Typically, you'll see games, especially Chaos Engine games, build on just throwing more grenades into the environment as it gets closer and closer to that end of game state, and that's how you get that sort of crescendo effect. You do want to constrain the player's actions, resources, or time as a way of kind of making it more difficult. But all of that is in service of chaos. The system itself is not thinking. So when we start looking at how can we make a system think, first of all, just very, very bluntly, we don't want to try to make paper as smart as a person, right? So we have to assume that the AI system will cheat. So we know that that is the case. And the way that it cheats is you just constrain the number of choices that it can make. You just kind of keep the good ones. So the first thing you want to do is list all the relative data points that would inform the decision. So just take the game that you're designing, which is a multiplayer game, and say, okay, I'm playing this game. What is a good move? What does a good move look like? All right. And we think of that. And then we write down really an exhaustive list of everything that you think would inform that decision. What is it that I'm considering when I go to make that decision of what move to make in that game. And it could be a very, very long list. And I do encourage you to make a very, very long list because you're going to make changes to that list very shortly. So you make your big long list of, all right, well, these are all the things that I think about. Now you're going to identify the major changes to the game state. When I make my move, what changes? Is it just this little part of the board? Is it, this track and this other thing? So like I make my decision and what impact does that have on the entire game? Then I'm going to define plausible outputs. What does a believable decision look like? So yes, I could make a move that is dumb and it would have this impact. You really don't want to focus on the dumb moves. We're just trying to make the AI smart, so we want to identify what are the smart decisions, what are those decisions, how do those decisions change the game state? And then that brings us to probably the most important piece, which is to assess and exclude the unnecessary data. So that would be if you did happen to make a list of every possible decision that your AI could make, and you said, well, it's 100 decisions, but these 48 are terrible, you would just remove those, right? In fact, you could probably not go through the effort of making that big list. You could just start with the 52 that are good. And then with those moves, now we can start looking at how do I program that into a tool to exclude bad choices from the different situations and just leave the good ones? And ultimately, those are going to kind of filter into strategies. The most important thing that I can add is to encode the tool. And what I mean by that is you've got to be able to hide the obvious choice from the user. The human player is trying to play their game, and they're also trying to do a very simple input output into your tool. If the human player can look at your tool and say, oh, well, the AI is probably likely to do X, then they're going to change their decision based on that information. And so you want to make sure that when they look at that tool, it's not obvious what the AI is going to do until they actually plug in the values and kind of do that work to get the output. So fortunately, I do have an example here. This is Breakaway Football. I'm not going to go through sort of how to play. It's an explanation that I truly enjoy, but we don't have time for it. But it's a football emulator, and essentially, we wanted to have modern board game mechanisms in an American football game that you could play in about 90 minutes. So the yardage isn't 1 yard at a time like traditional football. It's actually in 5 yard chunks. So it moves, from the 40 to the 45 to the 50 and that sort of thing. And basically, you've got an example of the card there with halfback sweep on the top. So the runs are in orange and the passes are in blue. And then there's that number in the upper right corner, which is the value of that. And so the defensive value, the offense minus the defense value gives you a single digit, arithmetic that you can do. And so a 3 - 2 gives you a 1, and that means that you would move 1 yard line on the board. There is a game day deck that actually modifies this so that a lot of the excitement of real football and the flavor text of it is encapsulated in the game day deck. And that's basically how you play. So let me take a quick look at how we designed our AI. So each team is based on a particular historical franchise. This one is the Pittsburgh Steelers from 1978. And they beat the Cowboys in Super Bowl 13. Here's the Cowboys team that's based on that same year. And so each team has its own strengths and its weaknesses, different formations, and different special mechanisms. But fundamentally, the way you play breakaway football is the offense will place their play on the card. And this is actually their card on the board. This is the solo board that we're looking at. So they'll put that card on the board, and then the defense has to consider what information, that imperfect information that's being provided by the formation of that card. After they consider what pro set means for that particular team, then they'll go ahead and place their defensive play on the board, and then they'll flip both cards and resolve that play to get a result. So the formations here, the offensive formations are run heavy and balanced. So when they put pro set on the board, I know that they have kind of a 50-50 chance of run or pass, maybe even a little more depending on the team. Most teams have three: a run heavy, a balanced, and a pass heavy. So for example, the horsemen have that. So this is the kind of thing that you internalize as you're playing breakaway football, but there is a little bit of hidden information, imperfect information that's right in front of you. So here's our first version of of an AI. We were trying to figure out how the AI would call offense. And this is version one. This is the one that's been discontinued. So this is the one that really doesn't work as well. But when we first launched, we said, well, gosh, it sounds like, the deck of cards has in it all of the things that a team would do. The deck is designed to kind of lean one way. You can just randomly pull cards, right? And so if you think about it, that is a chaos engine. And it provides a little too much information here. So we thought, well, gosh, we'll just burn a card. And that way we don't know which card's coming up next. So when I make my defensive call, haha, it's still the same problem, right? Whatever card comes off the deck, we know that there is no thought behind what card that was. And we know that that is an unsatisfying way to have a card come up, especially if they are in a long yardage down in distance, third and five, third and six lines to go, and they pull some, short pass or run play that doesn't make sense in that situation. So we changed that to our version two, which came out a few years ago. And it is an AI sheet that has encoded in it the logic of how that team would perform. And each team has its own AI sheet that is tuned to its deck strength and its special mechanisms. So the way this works is you've got your formation, and you know what down it is: first down, second down, or third and fourth down. And then the distance to the milestone is just how far you have to go to get a first down. And so we take a look at that. And we have what's called a game state, which is a very simple way to kind of capture what is the situation of the game. This was the tough one when I went to the reactive machine kind of list, and I said, okay, let me list out all of the things that I would think about to help me make a good decision on what play to call. It was a long list. It's not only is it down in distance, but it's also what the score is, what my opponent's tendencies have been, how much time's left on the clock. There was a lot of things that I could have used. But what I learned was through trial and error that basically I could get down to just the down in the distance and still get a high quality decision. So it became really obvious to me, well, let's just express that. We'll add them together. So if it's first down and four lines to go, 1 + 4 is 5. The game state is 5. And so what we have are these color coded, and I apologize to anybody who is colorblind, but we have blue 80, red 98, and green 18. These are things that you'll actually hear quarterbacks in the National Football League call out at the line of scrimmage. So we just wanted to get a little verisimilitude there. But essentially, those three columns are three different strategies. And that uh, conservative green, the green is conservative, the blue is kind of balanced, and the red is aggressive. And so for the early teams that kind of holds, but once the teams became more intricate and more interesting, and more nuanced, we decided to have those strategies represent, okay, well, this particular color means that they're just trying to get 1 yard line, and this one is their specialty kind of trick plays, and then this one is their high value stuff. So you have these different strategies that are encoded, embedded into these AI sheets, but the way that the sheet gets used is the exact same for every team. So if I haven't played a team in a while and I come to them, it is really well encoded. I don't know what blue means for the blacksmiths. I don't know what that means. What it allows is, as I play against them, I can start to see those tendencies and go, oh, when they go blue, it means this. Well, let me start trying to hedge against that. And now I'm in that headspace of I really feel like I'm playing against a person because I'm starting to figure out what this coding is telling me about their tendencies and their strategies. The randomness cycles within the strategy. So you've got 6 different choices in each one of those strategies. And those aren't the actual play calls. If we roll a 1 on green 18 and we get Jet Razor, that is just a code. On the back of the sheet is the Jet Razor. You could actually triangulate that and figure out what the actual play is. So we've actually printed the plays for folks, and they can pretty much play it off the sheet if they want to. And this gives a very high quality opponent that is really thinking and trying to be smart about what it is calling on any given down. It's not always going to be a perfect play. Remember, our goal is to make plausible decisions. And so what we've tried to do is just remove the bad decisions from the set. They basically have 6 plays they can call. And I guarantee you that if we've got a play in close and a play in pro set, that we're going to make sure that Gold Dragon, which is a power run in close, Gold Dragon in Pro Set is an outside run. We're going to try really hard not to have that coding be the same from formation to formation. And that way, it's even an extra layer of protection against people being able to kind of guess what may or may not come out. So yeah, I kind of went through this already. But yeah, if we have first down and four and we roll a die and there you go, a roll of five and I get pro set. So that's how I know what card to put on the board. And as you can see, there are different ratios of when certain formations would be called. So, third and fourth and five or more is a very long yardage situation. It's traditionally a passing down. So they're going to go with their pro set, which has more pass plays in it than their close formation, which is a running formation. And if you look at first and one or two, which is a very short yardage situation, that's why they have 5 out of 6 times they're going to be using their close formation, which is their run heavy set. When you identify the game state and we kind of add those together and we figure out how far you have to go, that's what we end up using as the game state. And each team uses that calculation differently. So you're always going to just add the down and distance together. But what color goes on what number is different from team to team because each team has different strengths that we're trying to accentuate. And then when you roll for the play, it gives you that coding, and then you can go to the back and see what that play is going to be. So I'm really happy with the way this worked, and we got really good feedback on it. So much so that it showcased how our defensive AI was less than stellar. So this is the version 1 of the AI on defense. So we've already talked about how the AI would call its play on offense. Now I'm on offense. I'm going to put my card on the board first, and my defense is going to make a call. Well, here is a chart that I can roll on. Well, this chart isn't great. Okay. And as the designer of this chart, I will take this on the chin. Basically, what it's done here is it hasn't encoded any of its information. So I can kind of look at this chart and knowing probability of die rolls, I can guess, what's likely to happen. If I put up a balanced formation, I know they're going to be rolling 2 dice. And I know that the most likely thing on 2 dice is 7, which here is a wide run. So I can go ahead and call the thing that would blow up a wide run, and I would be right more often than I should. The other thing is that this methodology is different from the offense. And so to have a methodology of how you arrive at your AI decision that's different on the offense and the defense really means that you have two different systems inside the game. So I have to know two different rule sets in order to play this game. Not great. At the time that this came out, it was the random card pull. So we didn't have another system to compare it to. But we quickly figured out that we really should align the defensive AI to match the style of the offensive AI in the way that you arrive at the decision. Um, so we ended up doing that. This is our version 2 of the defense, and I'm not going to walk through the whole thing again. In the interest of time. But one thing I want to show you here is that if you see the big red numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are the steps on how to use this. That is something I wish that we had included in the offensive AI. And I would encourage you to consider doing this on your tool, is to actually include the rules on how to use it on the tool. It's very, very helpful. If I've been away from the game for a while and I kind of pick it up because like, oh, I haven't played this in a while, I'd like to not have to go back to that solo rule book and kind of relearn how to do it. It'd be great if the tool could prompt me. And this one does. And it does something very similar. The opponent formation is I'm the human. I place an offensive card on the board that's going to be either run heavy, balanced, or pass heavy. And so I know which column to roll in on the front of the sheet. I can calculate the game state by adding the down and the distance the same way I did on offense. And so now I know which box I'm rolling on. I roll 1 die and I figure out what strategy the defense is going to take on: eagle, stunt, or twist, which again are just codes for conservative and aggressive and whatnot. So I know where to look. And this even has the added capability of having a spy. Again, we won't go into that, but this is a really clean way of getting it done. And believe it or not, this kind of rigor has actually increased the number of players that want to come to the game because they recognize that this tool, once you kind of figure out how to use it, which doesn't take a lot of effort, the decision quality is so high and the usability is fairly effortless that they really do feel like they're playing against a person. So it has actually increased the following of our game. So the features and successes of a reactive machine, we'll just cover this very quickly and then we'll pause for questions. First, you want to embed the strategy for better decision quality. So you want that to be in the tool. You want to encode the action to make sure that the intent of the bot isn't easy to interpret or guess ahead of time. You want to improve the choice, which limits or excludes situationally bad choices. And you want to simplify the decision so that the factors that the bot is considering, there just aren't that many variables that it has to consider. Again, it's that easy in, easy out. So while some things that are important uh, to a human may not be that important to a bot to try to plug and chug, especially since a human has to run the machine. And then lastly, include the steps on the user interface, should include the steps on how to use it. And so that's essentially that's the 45 minutes. So we'll go ahead and do a quick recap. We explored what worked about solo modes. We talked about Chaos Engine versus Reactive Machine, had a little bit of guidance on how to create your own paper-based solo AI, and we did a case study in Breakaway Football. And so we are right at time. So I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for any questions that may come up. So I'm actually going to bounce out and see if there are any questions.
So, Arthur, I didn't see any questions yet, but I have
Okay.
a question. Do you find that there are different types of players that like the Chaos Engine or the Reactive Machine?
I
You
think
kind of talked about the Chaos Engine as being random and kind of taking control away or not being smart, but do you find that there are players who really do enjoy that style?
Yeah, there's just because the Chaos Engine isn't making a decision doesn't mean it's not fun. When we have a system that just throws more and more at you, I think of the game Asteroids back in the day. As the game progresses and the music kind of ramps up and you get more and more stuff that you're trying to deal with, that's a different experience, a kind of arcade experience, and it could be a lot of fun. But if I'm playing chess, I don't want to play chess the same way that I would play Asteroids. So it's really about figuring out which do I need in order to create the experience that I'm shooting for as a designer.
And how has the feedback been? You mentioned you've had version 1, you're on version 2 right now. Have you had any negative feedback from
No,
that change?
we really haven't. So the initial rollout of version one was well received, but there was a little bit of grumbling around, well, gosh, sometimes it doesn't do what it should do. And so you found a lot of house rules, right? Where people would go, oh, well, when that happens, I end up just doing, um, oh, I'm sorry, I can do that. One second. Is that kind of what you're looking for? Yeah. But yeah, the version one was the best that was available. But what was really cool is that as we improved on it and rolled out an improvement, those were gradual over time. We didn't have version one and then we sort of wiped the slate clean and came out with all of version two. It was actually April of 2020, so it was the very beginning curve of the pandemic, and everyone was at home, and we had already sort of identified we need to work on this, and now there was this global reason to continue to do it. So we started using Tabletop Simulator more purposefully, and we started to build out this AI. And when we rolled out the offensive AI, all it did was shine a spotlight on how bad the defensive AI was in comparison. Before, the defensive AI looked like the superstar because the offensive AI was a simple card draw that was what it was. So, in terms of Chaos Engine versus Reactive Machine, what we see is that if we have a reactive machine making a decision for one side of the ball, but a Chaos Engine making the decision for the other, players intuitively see the difference and they're frustrated that there is a difference. So we recognized that we needed to have both sides of the ball have their decisions from a reactive machine, and that they should really be similar in the way that the user interfaces with them. So once we did, and it took no lie, it took over 3.5 years to figure out how to crack the code on the defense. And once we did, we were able to roll it out in about a month and a half for all of the teams. There's 38 teams available, and each of them had their own special defensive AI that was tuned to their deck strength, but all of them function the same way. The steps are exactly the same. So the way you interface with it is identical, but the output that it gives you is different for each team. So it's really cool. I'm proud of it.
Uh, how about when you're testing these styles, when you're testing the AI, do you just find yourself testing it, or do you farm a lot of that out to other players who maybe have familiarity with the game?
Yeah.
Or like can you speak to that a little bit in some of the time we have left?
Absolutely. My goal really was to play the game every day. I couldn't get people to play it with me frequently enough. And when we were designing new teams, it was helpful to have a solo mode so that I could stress test some of the assumptions of the deck construction and whatnot. So I would play a lot of this on my own at first, but very quickly we had a dedicated following, small but very dedicated following of people who volunteered to help. And so anything new that I came up with, whether it was a new franchise that we wanted to try out or a new version of the solo, I was able to get at least 10 people to try it out and give me feedback. And that's ideally what you want. So in that early stage, really you're the tester. If you release things that are too new, they'll fall apart, and you may actually get discouraged or frustrated, and you may lose the the uh, the potential testers. They may see it as a kind of a low value activity. So I try very hard to get it in a place where I'm comfortable it won't break. So once I feel good that it won't break, if I put it in front of someone, that's when I want to put it in front of really everyone and get that full range of feedback. uh, on occasion I get feedback that is pointed and critical, and that is really good. So if you find that you're always getting, oh, it's cool, and then you ask, well, what would you do differently? No, nothing, man. It's awesome. It's cool. You've got to go find other testers to see if that's true. It's too easy to kind of put it in front of friends and family, and for them to be very kind to you, and then you think, oh, it's done. You got
My
to get a
grandma loves everything I've ever
right,
made.
right. You really want to get a wide range of opinions. It's nice to hear, this is cool. That I'm not saying that that's bad feedback, but if that's all you're getting, you're probably not having a wide enough audience to try it with. Okay.
All right.
So
Awesome.
with that, thank you for joining me. If you need to reach out to me for any reason, especially if you have questions that didn't occur to you now, but you're like, oh gosh, I should have asked, you can send an email to uplinkundergroundgames at cox.net, cox.net, and we'll be happy to get back to you at any time.